process which brings people together is useful. And with respect to closure, I think ultimately it's a very personal thing. How did those who lost, their kith and kin and friends in 1971 and 1988, 89 obtain closure? There were no truth commissions, there was no LLRC. But how did those who lost their loved ones in the tsunami obtain closure? They are too. What happened to a lot of the friends? Unknown. Children went missing, parents went missing, no one knows what happened. But I believe that there is no nation, no society, no civilization operates without having some inbuilt cultural mechanism to deal with loss, sorrow, death at the individual level and at the level of the community. And I believe that we have managed in 1971, post-1971, 1988, 89, to obtain closure in ways that a lot of other countries have not. Now these hearings, these commissions, people telling their stories are very important. Because that is one way of, I think psychologists would be able to explain this better, the cathartic effect, to get it out of your system, to be able to tell your story. Avenues to create, whether it is from the state or any other civil society organization or any other mechanism which allows stories to come up in any form, literature, art, theatre, or even giving evidence, is I think very useful. I can't tell you how you will obtain or closure or how you ought to, and you can't tell me how, but we don't even know until we get closure sometimes.
I think the point that closure is something essentially, something within, but at the same time I think certain external, for example the monument, at the same time religion, and here I'm talking of joint religious efforts, can support that sense of closure, which of course at the end of the day individual must recognition. But these are talking of supporting
it's really very different religions respond to loss and death in different ways. They have their own coping mechanism inbuilt into their system of beliefs. But always knowing what other peoples of other faith, how they handle things is useful. Knowledge is never useless. You take what you can. I'm not aware of that, but joint religious services, there's nothing wrong with it.
During October, went to war and killed millions. Thereafter he embraced because of that and he was able to bring all people together and solve problems without a single killing. I don't know how we set about it.
Today, when we have a democracy and democratic mechanisms and structures which allow for articulation of grievance, mechanisms to address them, then you don't need to go to war. When they fail, or when certain spoiler factors operate with magnitude of force that these structures and processes cannot contain, then you get rupture. I don't know, maybe Emperor Ashoka had enough power, but that is benevolence. I mean, we are not living in that kind of society. We need the structures, we need the institutions.
Mr. Seneviratne, like my colleague, thank you. The modalities of doing that.
Right. Just after I finished writing this, I had to write my column for the Daily News.
You can say it now without writing
No, I wrote this, I spoke to this issue. I was trying to think of what I remember most about this war. And the two things that came to mind was two children. One named Aswini, she died, she was 2.5 years old. She died on Dickman's Road when the LTTE exploded a bomb in some rival Tamil political figure. And another an A-level student who died in Ugewada bomb blast, Mahimsa. Now, when there is death to magnitude of 100,000, you forget names, the numbers. But as individuals, at various levels we can address this issue. Individuals, we have to come to terms with who we are and how we deal with the reality that we find. The history of, for the last 30 years, I'm 46, 30 years of my life, there's been a war. So it grows on you and grows silent on you. But in dealing with it, at the individual level, you have to do what you have to do. You have to be humble as communities, as collectives, and as a state. We have to recognize that we are not perfect. We are not saints or arahats. We are flawed. We are humanly frail. We make mistakes. There is no shame. There should be no shame in admitting error. Politicians, academics, journalists, whoever it is, should have the courage and the humility to acknowledge error. If that is done, that is the first step. We have not had a perfect society. The Sinhalese have not treated the Tamils well. The Tamils have not treated the Sinhalese well. The state has been unfair to a lot of people. No one talks about the working class. No one talks about communities that are in the margins, or the informal sector and the problems that they have. But we have to admit at every level that is relevant, and especially at the level of the individual, that we are humanly flawed, frail, and we should acknowledge that as a first step before we correct. So, processes of communication, dialogue, articulation, those are very important, and mechanisms that facilitate such things are useful.
Do you have any examples of such mechanisms?
Well, I can speak for myself. I talk to people, a lot of people. I go to buy my bulathwita from a man who lost his leg in the when Ranjan Wijayaratne was killed. They tell me their stories. I recognize in him as he's also a father, I'm a father. There are certain commonalities. I recognize the fact that the state has not done much for him. I recognize the fact that the pro-LTTE, pro-Eelam Tamil Diaspora doesn't care about him, doesn't know his name. There are things that we can talk about. There are things that we can feel ashamed that we could not do. In terms of the 1983 riots, my sorrow is that the Sinhalese people could not save each and every Tamil person who was attacked. Each and every, that is my sorrow, that is my guilt. I was 17 at that time, I helped to save a house from being burnt. I almost got stabbed by the mob. But we could not stop everyone. We should feel ashamed that regardless of whether the Tamils would have done the same to us, as some people say they would not. That is irrelevant. Why care about the other people? Let's talk about ourselves. So the same principle can be applied to the countries that vilify us. We can easily turn around and say, you guys just don't have the moral authority to tell us, to talk down on us. But that does not solve our problem here. Regardless of whether they are doing it right or wrong, we have to do it right.
The problem is that each community may have unruly people who do these things, and that light can hold each community is doing wrong.
So the universe of our ignorance is infinite. I don't know who I'll be tomorrow. I don't know who you will be tomorrow. We can only try. We might even, with the best of intentions, churn out tragedies we did not want to happen. So we can try, and that no one should say you have to show us a blueprint that can win. We can do what is possible based on our experiences. Not being too emotional about it, but deferring to reason. There's no guarantee. There can always be spoilers. When in a class of 10, when one thug gets up and does something bad, sometimes it might take some weakling who objects, and he might stop. Sometimes he will prevail. The thug will prevail. So there are no foolproof methods, I think, but the will, the determination to do good, how does you can't legislate for that.
In your submissions, you state, one of the important and critical issues that the LLRC has to address is the issue of accountability. How proper investigations and inquiries into allegations of crimes committed by all parties during the last stages of the armed conflict are to be conducted. Can you expand on this, please?
Right. Now I have heard, I don't have evidence about these things, but I have heard about a lot of atrocities that have been committed by the Sri Lankan armed forces over the last 30 years. And from my understanding, I believe that the army, the security forces have been far more disciplined over the last 5-6 years than they were 20 years ago. They learned their lesson. But at the same time, we haven't heard about people being prosecuted for wrongdoing, for all the atrocities that were committed. Forget about the LTTE and they are not beholden to anyone. But these are state actors. They get salaries, we pay their salaries as citizens. They should be accountable to us as a citizen, to the state, and to the rule of law. So, my sense, given the lack of prosecution, is that a lot of things have gone under the carpet. And that is not good for a society. That is not to say that these were systemic. But it becomes systemic if they are not addressed. And but if it sorted out the LTTE terrorism today, in a particular kind of way, and we look the other way because in the LTTE is terrorism, what happens if there is a legitimate, say, protest? The same thing happens tomorrow. And there's precedence. There's an example. This is how it is done, this is how it will get done. There was a lot that happened in 1988-89. There were no human rights operators, NGOs, INGOs. No one was there to talk about them. Why? Because the wrong kind of people who were getting killed. It didn't matter. But where is the prosecution? 1971, those stories haven't come out. Why? Where is the prosecution? Where are the mechanisms for investigation, prosecution, and bringing to book those who were responsible, those who were irresponsible, those who were, wavered, the soldiers, the officers who ordered random killings, torture? We don't know. There was torture.
No, I think Seneviratne, well,
I agree. The law, the judicial system can't. There is apparent wrongdoing. You can't prosecute without evidence. You can't, hang a person just because you know that something wrong has happened. I understand because that will create precedents which will create other problems. So maybe that is not communicated well enough. It's not the business of the judicial system, but politically, it is very important for people to know that stuff is happening. Now, for example, the case about Lasantha Wickramatunge. I'm sure investigations are taking place. It took 2 years to find a suspect in the assassination attempt on the Defense Secretary. It takes time. But when these things don't find articulation in the newspapers and in the media, the assumption is that nothing is being done, and that assumption is fed by people with politically motivated to create a bad picture.
but even in respect to the Tamil terrorists, the Prevention of Terrorism Act was brought in. One of the reasons was that there was no evidence that was forthcoming.